Mr. Bookman here. Before we go ahead and dive into today's audiobook, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel. If you like today's story, make sure you do give us a thumbs up. But as you probably figured, I'm an avid reader, so I don't really get a chance to work out a lot. But I've actually found this new diet pill that guarantees you to lose 1 pound per day. If you want to check it out, simply just click or copy the link in the description. Now let's get right into the book.
Chapter 1 of Black Heart and White Heart, a Zulu Idyll. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elvira in Pretoria, South Africa. Black Heart and White Heart by Sir Henry Rider Haggard. Dedication. To the memory of the child Nada Burnham, who bound all to her, and while her father cut his way through the hordes of the Ngcobo regiment, perished of the hardships of war at Bulawayo on 19th of May, 1896, I dedicate these tales, and more particularly the last, that of a faith which triumphed over savagery and death. H. Rider Haggard, Ditchingham. Chapter 1. Philip Haddon and King Cetywayo. At the date of our introduction to him, Philip Haddon was a transport rider and trader in the Zulu. Still on the right side of 40, in appearance he was singularly handsome, tall, dark, upright, with keen eyes, short pointed beard, curling hair, and clear-cut features. His life had been varied, and there were passages in it which he did not narrate even to his most intimate friends. He was of gentle birth, however, and it was said that he had received a public school and university education in England. At any rate, he could quote the classics with aptitude on occasion, an accomplishment which, coupled with his refined voice and a bearing not altogether common in the wild places of the world, had earned for him among his rough companions the sobriquet of the Prince. However these things may have been, it is certain that he had emigrated to Natal under a cloud, and equally certain that his relatives at home were content to take no further interest in his fortunes. During the 15 or 16 years which he had spent in or about the colony, Haddon followed many trades, and did no good at any of them. A clever man, of agreeable and prepossessing manner, he always found it easy to form friendships and to secure a fresh start in life. But, by degrees, the friends were seized with a vague distrust of him, and after a period of more or less application, he himself would close the opening that he had made by a sudden disappearance from the locality, leaving behind him a doubtful reputation and some bad debts. Before the beginning of the story of the most remarkable episodes in his life, Philip Haddon was engaged for several years in transport riding, that is, in carrying goods on ox wagons from Durban or Maritzburg to various points in the interior. A difficulty such as had more than once confronted him in the course of his career led to his temporary abandonment of this means of earning a livelihood. On arriving at the little frontier town of Utrecht in the Transvaal, in charge of 2 wagon loads of mixed goods consigned to a shopkeeper there, it was discovered that out of 6 cases of brandy, 5 were missing from his wagon. Haddon explained the matter by throwing the blame upon his Kaffir boys, but the storekeeper, a rough-tongued man, openly called him a thief and refused to pay the freight on any of the load. From words the 2 men came to blows, knives were drawn, and before anybody could interfere, the shopkeeper received a nasty wound in his side. That night, without waiting till the matter could be inquired into by the landdrost or magistrate, Haddon slipped away, and trekked back into Natal as quickly as his oxen would travel. Feeling that even here he was not safe, he left one of his wagons at Newcastle, loaded up the other with Kaffir goods such as blankets, calico, and hardware, and crossed into Zululand, where in those days no sheriff's officer would be likely to follow him. Being well acquainted with the language and customs of the natives, he did good trade with them, and soon found himself possessed of some cash and a small herd of cattle, which he received in exchange for his wares. Meanwhile news reached him that the man whom he had injured still vowed vengeance against him, and was in communication with the authorities in Natal. These reasons making his return to civilization undesirable for the moment, and further business being impossible until he could receive a fresh supply of trade stuff, Hadden, like a wise man, turned his thoughts to pleasure. Sending his cattle and wagon over the border, to be left in charge of a native headman with whom he was friendly, he went on foot to Ulundi to obtain permission from the king, Cetywayo, to hunt game in his country. Somewhat to his surprise, the Indunas or headmen received him courteously, for Hadden's visit took place within a few months of the outbreak of the Zulu War in 1878, when Cetywayo was already showing unfriendliness to the English traders and others, though why the king did so they knew not. On the occasion of his first and last interview with Cetywayo, Hadden got a hint of the reason. It happened thus. On the second morning after his arrival at the royal kraal, a messenger came to inform him that the elephant whose tread shook the earth had signified that it was his pleasure to see him. Accordingly, he was led through the thousands of huts and across the great place to the little enclosure where Cetywayo, a royal-looking Zulu, seated on a stool and wearing a kaross of leopard skins, was holding an indaba, or conference, surrounded by his counsellors. The Induna who had conducted him to the august presence went down upon his hands and knees, and uttering the royal salute of Bayete, crawled forward to announce that the white man was waiting. "Let him wait," said the king angrily, and turning, he continued the discussion with his counsellors. Now, as has been said, Hadden thoroughly understood Zulu, and when from time to time the king raised his voice, some of the words he spoke reached his ear. "What?" Cetywayo said to a wizened and aged man, who seemed to be pleading with him earnestly. "Am I a dog, that these white hyenas should hunt me thus? Is not the land mine, and was it not my father's before me? Are not the people mine to save or to slay? I tell you that I will stamp out these little white men. My impis shall eat them up. I have said." Again the withered aged man interposed, evidently in the character of a peacemaker. Hadden could not hear his talk, but he rose and pointed towards the sea, while from his expressive gestures and sorrowful mien he seemed to be prophesying disaster should a certain course of action be followed. For a while the king listened to him. Then he sprang up from his seat, his eyes literally ablaze with rage. "Hearken," he cried to the counsellor. "I have guessed it for long, and now I am sure of it. You are a traitor. You are Semseo's dog," Semseo being Sir Theophilus Shepstone, "and the dog of the Natal government, and I will not keep another man's dog to bite me in my own house. Take him away." A slight involuntary murmur rose from the ring of Indunas, but the old man never flinched, not even when the soldiers, who presently would murder him, came and seized him roughly. For a few seconds, perhaps 5, he covered his face with the corner of the kaross he wore. Then he looked up and spoke to the king in a clear voice. "O king," he said, "I am a very old man. As a youth I served under Shaka the lion, and I heard his dying prophecy of the coming of the white man. Then the white men came, and I fought for Dingaan at the battle of Blood River. They slew Dingaan, and for many years I was the counsellor of Banda, your father. I stood by you, O king, at the battle of Tugela, when its grey waters were turned to red with the blood of Umbulazi, your brother, and of the tens of thousands of his people. Afterwards I became your counsellor, O king, and I was with you when Sompseu set the crown upon your head, and you made promises to Sompseu, promises that you have not kept. Now you are weary of me, and it is well, for I am very old, and doubtless my talk is foolish, as it chances to the old. Yet I think that the prophecy of Shaka, your great uncle, will come true, and that the white men will prevail against you, and that through them you shall find your death. I would that I might have stood in one more battle and fought for you, O king, since fight you will. But the end which you choose is for me the best end. Sleep in peace, O king, and farewell. Bayete! This being the royal salute of the Zulus. For a space there was silence, a silence of expectation, while men waited to hear the tyrant reverse his judgment. But it did not please him to be merciful, or the needs of policy outweighed his pity. "Take him away," he repeated. Then, with a slow smile on his face, and one word, "Good night," upon his lips, supported by the arm of a soldier, the old warrior and statesman shuffled forth to the place of death. Hadden watched and listened in amazement not unmixed with fear. "If he treats his own servants like this, what will happen to me?" he reflected. "We English must have fallen out of favour since I left Natal. I wonder whether he means to make war on us, or what? If so, this isn't my place." Just then the king, who had been gazing moodily at the ground, chanced to look up. "Bring the stranger here," he said. Hadden heard him, and coming forth, offered Cetywayo his hand in as cool and nonchalant a manner as he could command. Somewhat to his surprise, it was accepted. "At least, white man," said the king, glancing at his visitor's tall, spare form and cleanly cut face, "you are no Umfagozan," which means low fellow. "You are of the blood of chiefs." "Yes, king," answered Hadden with a little sigh, "I am of the blood of chiefs." "What do you want in my country, white man?" "Very little, king. I have been trading here, as I dare say you have heard, and have sold all my goods. Now I ask your leave to hunt buffalo and other big game, for a while, before I return to Natal." "I cannot grant it," answered Cetywayo. "You are a spy sent by Sompseu, or by the Queen's Induna in Natal. Get you gone." "Indeed," said Hadden, with a shrug of his shoulders. "Then I hope that Sompseu, or the Queen's Induna, or both of them, will pay me when I return to my own country. Meanwhile, I will obey you because I must, but I should first like to make you a present." "What present?" asked the king. "I want no presents. We are rich here, white man." "So be it, king. It was nothing worthy of your taking, only a rifle." "A rifle, white man? Where is it?" "Without. I would have brought it, but your servants told me that it is death to come armed before the elephant who shakes the earth." Cetywayo frowned, for the note of sarcasm did not escape his quick ear. "Let this white man's offering be brought. I will consider the thing." Instantly the Induna who had accompanied Hadden darted to the gateway, running with his body bent so low that it seemed as though at every step he must fall upon his face. Presently he returned with the weapon in his hand and presented it to the king, holding it so that the muzzle was pointed straight at the royal breast. "I crave leave to say, O elephant," remarked Hadden in a drawling voice, "that it might be well to command your servant to lift the mouth of that gun from your heart." "Why?" asked the king. "Only because it is loaded, and at full cock, O elephant, who probably desires to continue to shake the earth." At these words the elephant uttered a sharp exclamation, and rolled from his stool in a most unkingly manner, whilst the terrified Induna, springing backwards, contrived to touch the trigger of the rifle and discharge a bullet through the exact spot that a second before had been occupied by his monarch's head. "Let him be taken away," shouted the incensed king from the ground, but long before the words had passed his lips, the Induna, with the cry that the gun was bewitched, had cast it down and fled at full speed through the gate. "He has already taken himself away," suggested Hadden, while the audience tittered. "No, king, do not touch it rashly. It is a repeating rifle. Look." And lifting the Winchester, he fired the 4 remaining shots in quick succession into the air, striking the top of a tree at which he aimed with every one of them. "Wow! It is wonderful," said the company in astonishment. "Has the thing finished?" asked the king. "For the present it has," answered Hadden. "Look at it." Cetywayo took the repeater in his hand and examined it with caution, swinging the muzzle horizontally in an exact line with the stomachs of some of his most eminent Indunas, who shrank to this side and that as the barrel was brought to bear on them. "See what cowards they are, white man," said the king with indignation. "They fear lest there should be another bullet in this gun." "Yes," answered Hadden, "they are cowards indeed. I believe that if they were seated on stools they would tumble off them, just as it chanced to your majesty to do just now." "Do you understand the making of guns, white man?" asked the king hastily, while the Indunas one and all turned their heads and contemplated the fence behind them. "No, king, I cannot make guns, but I can mend them." "If I paid you well, white man, would you stop here at my kraal and mend guns for me?" asked Cetywayo anxiously. "It might depend on the pay," answered Hadden, "but for a while I am tired of work and wish to rest. If the king gives me the permission to hunt for which I asked, and men to go with me, and when I return, perhaps we can bargain on the matter. If not, I will bid the king farewell and journey to Natal." "In order to make report of what he has seen and heard here," muttered Cetywayo. At this moment the talk was interrupted, for the soldiers who had led away the old Induna returned at speed and prostrated themselves before the king. "Is he dead?" he asked. "He has travelled the king's bridge," they answered grimly. "He died singing a song of praise of the king." "Good," said Cetywayo. "That stone shall hurt my feet no more. Go, tell the tale of its casting away to Sompseu, and to the queen's Induna in Natal," he added with bitter emphasis. "Baba, hear our father speak. Listen to the rumbling of the elephant," said the Indunas, taking the point, while one bolder than the rest added, "Soon we will tell them another tale, the white talking ones, a red tale, a tale of spears, and the regiments shall sing it in their ears." At the words an enthusiasm caught hold of the listeners, as the sudden flame catches hold of dry grass. They sprang up, for the most of them were seated on their haunches, and, stamping their feet upon the ground, in unison repeated: "Indaba ibomu, indaba yemikonto, lizo dunyiswa ngeimpi ndehlebeni yaho," which means, a red tale, a tale of spears, and the impis shall sing it in their ears. One of them, indeed a great fierce-faced fellow, drew near to Hadden, and shaking his fist before his eyes, fortunately being in the royal presence he had no assegai, shouted the sentences at him. The king saw that the fire he had lit was burning too fiercely. "Silence!" he thundered in the deep voice for which he was remarkable, and instantly each man became as if he were turned to stone. Only the echoes still answered back: and the impis shall sing it in their ears, in their ears. And the impis shall sing it in their ears, in their ears. I am growing certain that this is no place for me, thought Hadden. If that scoundrel had been armed, he might have temporarily forgotten himself. Hello, who's this? Just then there appeared through the gate of the fence a splendid specimen of the Zulu race. The man, who was about 35 years of age, was arrayed in a full war dress of a captain of the Cetywayo regiment. From the circlet of otter skin on his brow rose his crest of plumes. Round his middle, arms, and knees hung the long fingers of black oxtails, and in one hand he bore a little dancing shield, also black in colour. The other was empty, since he might not appear before the king bearing arms. In countenance the man was handsome, and though just now they betrayed some anxiety, his eyes were genial and honest, and his mouth sensitive. In height he must have measured 6 feet 2 inches, yet he did not strike the observer as being tall, perhaps because of his width of chest and the solidity of his limbs. They were in a curious contrast to the delicate and almost womanish hands and feet which so often mark the Zulu of noble blood. In short, the man was what he seemed to be, a savage gentleman of birth, dignity, and courage. In company with him was another man, plainly dressed in a moocha and a blanket, whose grizzled hair showed him to be over 50 years of age. His face was also pleasant and even refined, but the eyes were timorous, and the mouth lacked character. "Who are these?" asked the king. The two men fell on their knees before him, and bowed till their foreheads touched the ground, the while giving him his sibonga, or titles of praise. "Speak," he said impatiently. "O King," said the young warrior, seating himself in Zulu fashion, "I am Nahoon, the son of Zomba, a captain of the Cetywayo, and this is my uncle Umgona, the brother of one of my mothers, my father's youngest wife." Cetywayo frowned. "What do you here away from your regiment, Nahoon?" "May it please the king, I have leave of absence from the head captains, and I come to ask a boon of the king's bounty." "Be swift, Nahoon." "It is this, O king," said the captain with some embarrassment. "A while ago the king was pleased to make a keshla of me because of certain service that I did out yonder," and he touched the black ring which he wore in the hair of his head. "Being now a ringed man and a captain, I crave the right of a man at the hands of the king, the right to marry." "Right? Speak more humbly, son of Zomba. My soldiers and my cattle have no rights." Nahoon bit his lip, for he had made a serious mistake. "Pardon, O king. The matter stands thus. My uncle Umgona here has a fair daughter named Nanea, whom I desire to wife, and who desires me to husband. Awaiting the king's leave, I am betrothed to her, and in earnest of it, I have paid to Umgona a lobola of 15 head of cattle, cows, and calves together. But Umgona has a powerful neighbor, an old chief named Maputa, the warden of the Crocodile Drift, who doubtless is known to the king, and this chief also seeks Nanea in marriage, and harries Umgona, threatening him with many evils if he will not give the girl to him. But Umgona's heart is white towards me, and towards Maputa it is black. Therefore, together, we come to crave this boon of the king." "It is so. He speaks the truth," said Umgona. "Cease," answered Cetywayo angrily. "Is this a time that my soldiers should seek wives in marriage, wives to turn their hearts to water? Know that but yesterday for this crime I commanded that 20 girls, who had dared without my leave to marry men of the Undi regiment, should be strangled, and their bodies laid upon the crossroads, and with them the bodies of their fathers, that all might know their sin and be warned thereby. Ay, Umgona, it is well for you and for your daughter that you sought my word before she was given in marriage to this man. Now this is my award. I refuse your prayer, Nahoon, since you, Umgona, are troubled with whom you would not take as a son-in-law, the old chief Maputa. I will free you from this importunity." "The girl," says Nahoon, "is fair. Good. I myself will be gracious to her, and she shall be numbered among the wives of the royal house. Within 30 days from now, in a week of the next new moon, let her be delivered to the Sigotla, the royal house of the women, and with her those cattle, the cows and the calves together, that Nahoon has given you, of which I fine him because he has dared to think of marriage without the leave of the king." End of chapter 1. Recording by Elvira. Chapter 2 of Black Heart and White Heart. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elvira. Chapter 2. The Bee Prophesies. A Daniel came to judgment, indeed, reflected Hadden, who had been watching this savage comedy with interest. Our lovesick friend has got more than he bargained for. Well, that comes of appealing to Caesar, and he turned to look at the two suppliants. The old man, Umgona, merely started, then began to pour out sentences of conventional thanks and praise to the king for his goodness and condescension. Cetywayo listened to his talk in silence, and when he had done, answered by reminding him tersely that if Nanea did not appear at the date named, both she and he, her father, would in due course certainly decorate a crossroad in their own immediate neighbourhood. The captain, Nahoon, afforded a more curious study. As the fatal words crossed the king's lips, his face took an expression of absolute astonishment, which was presently replaced by one of fury, the just fury of a man who suddenly has suffered an unutterable wrong. His whole frame quivered, the veins stood out in knots on his neck and forehead, and his fingers closed convulsively, as though they were grasping the handle of a spear. Presently the rage passed away, for as well might a man be wroth with fate as with the Zulu despot, to be succeeded by a look of the most hopeless misery. The proud dark eyes grew dull, the copper-coloured face sank in and turned ashen, the mouth drooped, and down one corner of it there trickled a little line of blood, springing from the lip bitten through in the effort to keep silence. Lifting his hand in salute to the king, the great man rose and staggered rather than walked towards the gate. As he reached it, the voice of Cetywayo commanded him to stop. "Stay," he said. "I have a service for you, Nahoon, that shall drive out of your head these thoughts of wives and marriage. You see this white man here? He is my guest, and would hunt buffalo and big game in the bush country. I put him in your charge. Take men with you, and see that he comes to no hurt. See also that you bring him before me within a month, or your life shall answer for it. Let him be here at my royal kraal in the first week of the new moon, when Nanea comes, and then I will tell you whether or not I agree with you that she is fair. Go now, my child, and you, white man, go also. Those who are to accompany you shall be with you at the dawn. Farewell, but remember we meet again at the new moon, when we will settle what pay you shall receive as keeper of my guns. Do not fail me, white man, or I shall send after you, and my messengers are sometimes rough." "This means that I am a prisoner," thought Hadden, "but it will go hard if I cannot manage to give them the slip somehow. I don't intend to stay in this country if war is declared, to be pounded into muti, which means medicine, or have my eyes put out, or any little joke of that sort?" 10 days had passed, and one evening Hadden and his escort were encamped in a wild stretch of mountainous country lying between the Blood and Umvunyana rivers, not more than 8 miles from that place of the little hand, which within a few weeks was to become famous throughout the world by its native name of Isandlwana. For 3 days they had been tracking the spoor of a small herd of buffalo that still inhabited the district, but as yet they had not come up with them. The Zulu hunters had suggested that they should follow the Umvunyana down towards the sea, where game was more plentiful, but this neither Hadden nor the captain Nahoon had been anxious to do, for reasons which each of them kept secret to himself. Hadden's object was to work gradually down to the Buffalo River, across which he hoped to effect a retreat into Natal. That of Nahoon was to linger in the neighbourhood of the kraal of Umgona, which was situated not very far from their present camping place, in the vague hope that he might find an opportunity of speaking with, or at least seeing, Nanea, the girl to whom he was affianced, who within a few weeks must be taken from him and given over to the king. A more eerie-looking spot than that where they were encamped Hadden had never seen. Behind them lay a tract of land, half swamp and half bush, in which the buffalo were supposed to be hiding. Beyond a lonely grandeur rose the mountain of Isandlwana, while in front was an amphitheatre of the most gloomy forest, ringed round in the distance by sheer-sided hills. In this forest there ran a river which drained the swamp, placidly enough upon the level, but it was not always level, for within 300 yards of them it dashed suddenly over a precipice of no great height but very steep, falling into a boiling rock-bound pool that the light of the sun never seemed to reach. "What is the name of that forest, Nahoon?" asked Hadden. "It is named Emagudu, the home of the dead," the Zulu replied absently, for he was looking towards the kraal of Nanea, which was situated at an hour's walk away over the ridge to the right. "The home of the dead? Why?" "Because the dead live there, those whom we name the Esemkofu, the speechless ones, and with them other spirits, the Amahlosi, from whom the breath of life has passed away and who yet live on." "Indeed," said Hadden. "And have you ever seen these ghosts?" "Am I mad that I should go to look for them, white man? Only the dead enter that forest, and it is on the borders of it that our people make offerings to the dead." Followed by Nahoon, Hadden walked to the edge of the cliff and looked over it. To the left lay the deep and dreadful-looking pool, while close to the bank of it, placed upon a narrow strip of turf between the cliff and the commencement of the forest, was a hut. "Who lives there?" asked Hadden. "The great Isanusi, she who is named Inyanga or Doctoress, she who is named Inyosi, the bee, because she gathers wisdom from the dead who grow in the forest." "Do you think that she could gather enough wisdom to tell me whether I am going to kill any buffalo, Nahoon?" "Mayhap, white man, but," he added with a little smile, "those who visit the bee's hive may hear nothing, or they may hear more than they wish for. The words of that bee have a sting." "Good, I will see if she can sting me." "So be it," said Nahoon, and turning, he led the way along the cliff till he reached a native path which zigzagged down its face. By this path they climbed till they came to the sward at the foot of the descent, and walked up it to the hut, which was surrounded by a low fence of reeds, enclosing a small courtyard paved with ant-heap earth, beaten hard and polished. In this courtyard sat the bee, her stool being placed almost at the mouth of the round opening that served as a doorway to the hut. At first, all that Hadden could see of her crouched as she was in the shadow, was a huddled shape, wrapped round with a greasy and tattered cat-skin kaross, above the edge of which appeared two eyes, fierce and quick as those of a leopard. At her feet smouldered a little fire, and ranged around it in a semicircle were a number of human skulls, placed in pairs as though they were talking together, whilst other bones, to all appearance also human, were festooned about the hut and the fence of the courtyard. "I see that the old lady is set up with the usual properties," thought Hadden, but he said nothing. Nor did the witch doctoress say anything. She only fixed her beady eyes upon his face. Hadden returned the compliment, staring at her with all his might, till suddenly he became aware that he was vanquished in this curious duel. His brain grew confused, and to his fancy it seemed that the woman before him had shifted shape into the likeness of a colossal and horrid spider, sitting at the mouth of her trap, and that these bones were the relics of her victims. "Why do you not speak, white man?" she said at last in a slow, clear voice. "Well, there is no need, since I can read your thoughts. You are thinking that I, who am called the bee, should be better named the spider. Have no fear. I did not kill these white men. What would it profit me when the dead are so many? I suck the souls of men, not their bodies, white man. It is their living hearts I love to look on, for therein I read much, and thereby I grow wise. Now what would you of the bee, white man, the bee that labours in this garden of death? And what brings you here, son of Zomba? Why are you not with the Umtiyu, now that they doctor themselves for the great war? The last war, the war of the white and the black. Or if you have no stomach for fighting, why are you not at the side of Nanea the tall, Nanea the fair?" Nahoon made no answer, but Hadden said, "A small thing, mother. I would know if I shall prosper in my hunting." "In your hunting, white man? What hunting? The hunting of game, of money, or of women? Well, one of them, for a hunting you must ever be. That is your nature, to hunt and be hunted. Tell me now, how goes the wound of that trader who tasted of your steel yonder in the town of Maboon, Boers?" "No need to answer, white man. But what fee, chief, for the poor witch doctoress whose skill you seek?" she added in a whining voice. "Surely you would not that an old woman should work without a fee?" "I have nothing to offer you, mother, so I will be going," said Hadden, who began to feel himself satisfied with this display of the bee's powers of observation and thought-reading. "Nay," she answered with an unpleasant laugh. "Would you ask a question and not wait for the answer? I will take no fee from you at present, white man. You shall pay me later on, when we meet again." And once more she laughed. "Let me look in your face," she continued, rising and standing before him. Then, of a sudden, Hadden felt something cold at the back of his neck, and the next instant the bee had sprung from him, holding between her thumb and finger a curl of dark hair which she had cut from his head. The action was so instantaneous that he had neither time to avoid nor to resent it, but stood still, staring at her stupidly. "That is all I need," she cried, "for like my heart, my magic is white. Stay, son of Zomba, give me also of your hair, for those who visit the bee must listen to her humming." Nahoon obeyed, cutting a little lock from his head with the sharp edge of his assegai, though it was very evident that he did this not because he wished to do so, but because he feared to refuse. Then the bee slipped back her kaross, and stood bending over the fire before them, into which she threw herbs taken from a pouch that was bound about her middle. She was still a finely shaped woman, and she wore none of the abominations which Hadden had been accustomed to see upon the persons of witch doctoresses. About her neck, however, was a curious ornament, a small live snake, red and grey in hue, which her visitors recognized as one of the most deadly to be found in that part of the country. It is not unusual for Bantu witch doctors thus to decorate themselves with snakes, though whether or not their fangs have first been extracted, no one seems to know. Presently the herbs began to smoulder, and the smoke of them rose up in a thin, straight stream, that, striking upon the face of the bee, clung about her head, enveloping it as though with a strange blue veil. Then of a sudden she stretched out her hands, and let fall the 2 locks of hair upon the burning herbs, where they writhed themselves into ashes like things alive. Next she opened her mouth, and began to draw the fumes of the hair and herbs into her lungs in great gulps, while the snake, feeling the influence of the medicine, hissed and, uncoiling itself from her neck, crept upwards and took refuge among the black sakaboola feathers of her headdress. Soon the vapours began to do their work. She swayed to and fro, muttering, then sank back against the hut, upon the straw of which her head rested. Now the bee's face was turned upwards towards the light, and it was ghastly to behold, for it had become blue in colour, and the open eyes were sunken, like the eyes of one dead, whilst above her forehead the red snake wavered and hissed, reminding Hadden of the uraeus crest on the brow of statues of Egyptian kings. For 10 seconds or more she remained thus. Then she spoke in a hollow and unnatural voice. "O black heart and body that is white and beautiful, I look into your heart, and it is black as blood, and it shall be black with blood. Beautiful white body with a black heart, you shall find your game and hunt it, and it shall lead you into the house of the homeless, into the home of the dead, and it shall be shaped as a bull, it shall be shaped as a tiger, it shall be shaped as a woman whom kings and waters cannot harm. Beautiful white body and black heart, you shall be paid your wages, money for money and blow for blow. Think of my word when the spotted cat purrs above your breast. Think of it when the battle roars about you. Think of it when you grasp your great reward, and for the last time stand face to face with the ghost of the dead in the home of the dead. O white heart in a black body, I look into your heart, and it is white as milk, and the milk of innocence shall save it. Fool, why do you strike that blow? Let him be who is loved of the tiger, and whose love is as the love of a tiger. Ah, what face is that in the battle? Follow it, O swift of foot, but follow warily, for the tongue that has lied will never plead for mercy, and the hand that can betray is strong in war. White heart, what is death? In death life lives, and among the dead you shall find the life you lost, for there awaits you she whom kings and waters cannot harm. As the bee spoke, by degrees her voice sank lower and lower, till it was almost inaudible. Then it ceased altogether, and she seemed to pass from trance to sleep. Hadden, who had been listening to her with an amused and cynical smile, now laughed aloud. "Why do you laugh, white man?" asked Nahoon angrily. "I laugh at my own folly in wasting time listening to the nonsense of that lying fraud." "It is no nonsense, white man." "Indeed? Then will you tell me what it means?" "I cannot tell you what it means yet, but her words have to do with a woman and a leopard, and with your fate and my fate." Hadden shrugged his shoulders, not thinking the matter worth further argument, and at that moment the bee woke up shivering, drew the red snake from her headdress, and coiling it about her throat, wrapped herself again in the greasy kaross. "Are you satisfied with my wisdom, Inkoos?" she asked of Hadden. "I am satisfied that you are one of the cleverest cheats in Zululand, mother," he answered coolly. "Now what is there to pay?" The bee took no offence at this rude speech, though for a second or two the look in her eyes grew strangely like that which they had seen in those of the snake, when the fumes of the fire made it angry. "If the white lord says I am a cheat, it must be so," she answered, for he of all men should be able to discern a cheat. "I have said that I ask no fee. Yes, give me a little tobacco from your pouch." Hadden opened the bag of antelope hide, and drawing some tobacco from it, gave it to her. In taking it, she clasped his hand and examined the gold ring that was upon the third finger, a ring fashioned like a snake, with two little rubies set in the head to represent the eyes. "I wear a snake about my neck, and you wear one upon your hand, Inkoos. I should like to have this ring to wear upon my hand, so that the snake about my neck may be less lonely there." "Then I'm afraid you'll have to wait till I'm dead," said Hadden. "Yes, yes," she answered in a pleased voice. "It is a good word. I will wait till you are dead, and then I will take the ring, and none can say that I've stolen it, for Nahoon there will bear me witness that you gave me permission to do so." For the first time Hadden started, since there was something about the bee's tone that jarred upon him. Had she addressed him in her professional manner, he would have thought nothing of it, but in her cupidity she had become natural, and it was evident that she spoke from conviction, believing her own words. She saw him start, and instantly changed her note. "Let the white lord forgive the jest of a poor old witch doctoress," she said in a whining voice. "I have so much to do with death that his name leaps to my lips." And she glanced first at the circle of skulls about her, then towards the waterfall that fed the gloomy pool upon whose banks her hut was placed. "Look," she said simply. Following the line of her outstretched hand, Hadden's eyes fell upon two withered mimosa trees, which grew over the fall almost at right angles to its rocky ledge. These trees were joined together by a rude platform made of logs of wood lashed down with rims of hide. Upon this platform stood three figures. Notwithstanding the distance and the spray of the fall, he could see that they were those of two men and a girl, for their shapes stood out distinctly against the fiery red of the sunset sky. One instant there were three, the next there were two, for the girl had gone, and something dark rushing down the face of the fall struck the surface of the pool with a heavy thud, while a faint and piteous cry broke upon his ear. "What is the meaning of that?" he asked, horrified and amazed. "Nothing," answered the bee with a laugh. "Do you not know, then, that this is the place where faithless women, or girls who have loved without the leave of the king, are brought to meet their death, and with them their accomplices? Oh, they die here thus each day, and I watch them die and keep the count of the number of them. and drawing a tally stick from the thatch of the hut, she took a knife and added a notch to the many that appeared upon it, looking at Nahoon the while with a half-questioning, half-warning gaze. "Yes, yes, it is a place of death," she muttered. "Up yonder the quick die, day by day, and down there," she pointed along the course of the river, beyond the pool to where the forest began, some 200 yards from her hut, "the ghosts of them have their home. Listen." As she spoke, a sound reached their ears that seemed to swell from the dim skirts of the forests, a peculiar and unholy sound, which it is impossible to define more accurately than by saying it seemed beast-like and almost inarticulate. "Listen," repeated the bee. "They are merry yonder." "Who?" asked Hadden. "The baboons?" "No, Inkoos, the Amatongo, the ghosts that welcome her who has just become of their number." "Ghosts?" said Hadden roughly, for he was angry at his own tremors. "I should like to see these ghosts. Do you think that I have never heard a troop of monkeys in the bush before, mother? Come, Nahoon, let us be going while there is light to climb the cliff. Farewell." "Farewell, Inkoos, and doubt not that your wish will be fulfilled. Go in peace, Inkoos, to sleep in peace." End of chapter 2. Recording by Elvira. Chapter 3 of Black Heart and White Heart by Sir Henry Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elvira. Chapter 3. The End of the Hunt. The prayer of the bee notwithstanding, Philip Hadden slept ill that night. He felt in the best of health, and his conscience was not troubling him more than usual, but rest he could not. Whenever he closed his eyes, his mind conjured up a picture of the grim witch doctoress, so strangely named the Bee, and the sound of her evil-omened words as he had heard them that afternoon. He was neither a suspicious nor a timid man, and any supernatural beliefs that might linger in his mind were, to say the least of it, dormant. But do what he might, he could not shake off a certain eerie sensation of fear, lest there should be some grains of truth in the prophesyings of this hag. What if it were a fact that he was near his death, and that the heart which beat so strongly in his breast must soon be still forever? No, he would not think of it. This gloomy place, and the dreadful sight which he saw that day, had upset his nerves. The domestic customs of these Zulus were not pleasant, and for his part he was determined to be clear of them so soon as he was able to escape the country. In fact, if he could in any way manage it, it was his intention to make a dash for the border on the following night. To do this with a good prospect of success, however, it was necessary that he should kill a buffalo or some other head of game. Then, as he knew well, the hunters with him would feast upon meat until they could scarcely stir, and that would be his opportunity. Nahoon, however, might not succumb to this temptation, therefore he must trust to luck to be rid of him. If it came to the worst, he could put a bullet through him, which he considered he would be justified in doing, seeing that in reality the man was his jailer. Should this necessity arise, he felt indeed that he could face it without undue compunction, for in truth he disliked Nahoon. At times he even hated him. Their natures were antagonistic, and he knew that the great Zulu distrusted and looked down upon him, and to be looked down upon by a savage "nigger" was more than his pride could stomach. At the first break of dawn Hadden rose and roused his escort, who was still stretched in sleep around the dying fire, each man wrapped in his kaross or blanket. Nahoon stood up and shook himself, looking gigantic in the shadows of the morning. "What is your will, Umlungu," which means white man, "that you are up before the sun?" "My will, Muntumpofu (yellow man), is to hunt buffalo," answered Hadden coolly. It irritated him that this savage should give him no title of any sort. "Your pardon," said the Zulu, reading his thoughts, "but I cannot call you Inkosi because you are not my chief or any man's. Still, if the title white man offends you, we will give you a name." "As you wish," answered Hadden briefly. Accordingly they gave him a name, Inhlinzi Mgama, by which he was known among them thereafter. But Hadden was not best pleased when he found that the meaning of those soft-sounding syllables was Black Heart. That was how the Inyanga had addressed him, only she had used different words. An hour later, and they were in the swampy bush country that lay behind their encampment searching for their game. Within a little while Nahoon held up his hand, then pointed to the ground. Hadden looked. There, pressed deeply in the marshy soil and to all appearance not 10 minutes old, was the spoor of a small herd of buffalo. "I knew that we should find game today," whispered Nahoon, "because the bees said so." "Curse the bee," answered Hadden below his breath. "Come on." For a quarter of an hour or more they followed the spoor through thick reeds, till suddenly Nahoon whistled very softly and touched Hadden's arm. He looked up, and there, about 200 yards away, feeding on some higher ground among a patch of mimosa trees, were the buffaloes, 6 of them, an old bull with a splendid head, 3 cows, a heifer and a calf about 4 months old. Neither the wind nor the nature of the veld were favourable for them to stalk the game from their present position, so they made a detour of half a mile and very carefully crept towards them up the wind, slipping from trunk to trunk of the mimosas, and when these failed them, crawling on their stomachs under cover of tall tambuti grass. At last they were within 40 yards, and a further advance seemed impracticable, for although he could not smell them, it was evident from his movements that the old bull heard some unusual sound and was growing suspicious. Nearest to Hadden, who alone of the party had a rifle, stood the heifer broadside on, a beautiful shot. Remembering that she would make the best beef, he lifted his martini and, aiming at her immediately behind the shoulder, gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle exploded and the heifer fell dead, shot through the heart. Strangely enough, the other buffaloes did not at once run away. On the contrary, they seemed puzzled to account for the sudden noise, and not being able to wind anything, lifted their heads and stared round them. The pause gave Hadden space to get in a fresh cartridge and to aim again, this time at the old bull. The bullet struck him somewhere in the neck or shoulder, for he came to his knees, but in another second was up, and having caught sight of the cloud of smoke, he charged straight at it. Because of the smoke, or for some other reason, Hadden did not see him coming, and in consequence would most certainly have been trampled or gored, had not Nahoon sprung forward at the imminent risk of his own life and dragged him down behind an ant heap. A moment more and the great beast had thundered by, taking no further notice of them. "Forward," said Hadden, and leaving most of the men to cut up the heifer and carry the best of her meat to camp, they started on the blood spoor. For some hours they followed the bull, till at last they lost the trail on a patch of stony ground thickly covered with bush, and, exhausted by the heat, sat down to rest and to eat some biltong, or sun-dried flesh, which they had with them. They finished their meal and were preparing to return to the camp, when one of the 4 Zulus who were with them went to drink at a little stream that ran at a distance of not more than 10 paces away. Half a minute later they heard a hideous grunting noise and a splashing of water, and saw the Zulu fly into the air. All the while that they were eating, the wounded buffalo had been lying in wait for them under a thick bush on the banks of the streamlet, knowing, cunning brute that he was, that sooner or later his turn would come. With a shout of consternation they rushed forward to see the bull vanish over the rise before Hadden could get a chance of firing at him, and to find their companion dying, for the great horn had pierced his lung. "It is not a buffalo, "It is a devil," the poor fellow gasped and expired. "Devil or not, I mean to kill it," exclaimed Hadden. So leaving the others to carry the body of their comrade to camp, he started on, accompanied by Nahoon only. Now the ground was more open and the chase easier, for they sighted their quarry frequently, though they could not come near enough to fire. Presently they travelled down a steep cliff. "Do you know where we are?" asked Nahoon, pointing to the belt of forest opposite. "That is Emagudu, the home of the dead. And look, the bull heads thither." Hadden glanced round him. It was true. Yonder to the left were the fall, the pool of doom, and the hut of the bee. "Very well," he answered, "then we must head for it too." Nahoon halted. "Surely you would not enter there," he exclaimed. "Surely I will," replied Hadden, "but there is no need for you to do so if you are afraid." "I am afraid of ghosts," said the Zulu, "but I will come." So they crossed the strip of turf and entered the haunted wood. It was a gloomy place indeed. The great wide-topped trees grew thick there, shutting out the sight of the sky, and moreover the air in it, which no breeze stirred, was heavy with the exhalations of rotting foliage. There seemed to be no life here and no sound. Only now and again a loathsome spotted snake would uncoil itself and glide away, and now and again a heavy rotten bough fell with a crash. Hadden was too intent upon the buffalo, however, to be much impressed by his surroundings. He only remarked that the light would be bad for shooting, and went on. They must have penetrated a mile or more into the forest, when the sudden increase of blood upon the spoor told them that the bull's wound was proving fatal to him. "Run now," said Hadden cheerfully. "Nay, hamba kahle, go softly," answered Nahoon. "The devil is dying, but he will try to play us another trick before he dies," and he went on peering ahead of him cautiously. "It is all right here anyway," said Hadden, pointing to the spoor that ran straight forward, printed deep in the marshy ground. Nahoon did not answer, but stared steadily at the trunks of two trees a few paces in front of them and to their right. "Look," he whispered. Hadden did so, and at length made out the outline of something brown that was crouched behind the trees. "He is dead!" he exclaimed. "No," answered Nahoon. "He has come back on his own path and is waiting for us. He knows that we are following his spoor. Now if you stand there, I think that you can shoot him through the back, between the tree trunks." Hadden knelt down, and aiming very carefully at a point just below the bull's spine, he fired. There was an awful bellow, and the next instant the brute was up and at them. Nahoon flung his broad spear, which sang deep into its chest. Then they fled this way and that. The buffalo stood still for a moment, its forelegs straddled wide and its head down, looking first after the one and then the other, till of a sudden it uttered a low moaning sound and rolled over dead, smashing Nahoon's assegai to fragments as it fell. "There, he's finished," said Hadden, "and I believe it was your assegai that killed him. Hullo, what's that noise?" Nahoon listened. In several quarters of the forest, but from how far away it was impossible to tell, there rose a curious sound, as of people calling to each other in fear, but in no articulate language. Nahoon shivered. "It is the Esemkofu," he said, "the ghosts who have no tongue, and who can only wail like infants. Let us be going. This place is bad for mortals." "And worse for buffaloes," said Hadden, giving the dead bull a kick. "But I suppose that we must leave him here for your friends, the Esemkofu, as we have got meat enough and can't carry his head." So they started back towards the open country. As they threaded their way slowly through the tree trunks, a new idea came into Hadden's head. Once out of this forest he was within an hour's run of the Zulu border, and once over the Zulu border he would feel a happier man than he did at that moment. As has been said, he had intended to attempt to escape in the darkness, but the plan was risky. All the Zulus might not overeat themselves and go to sleep, especially after the death of their comrade. Nahoon, who watched him day and night, certainly would not. This was his opportunity. There remained the question of Nahoon. Well, if it came to the worst, Nahoon must die. It would be easy. He had a loaded rifle, and now that his assegai was gone, Nahoon had only a kiri. He did not wish to kill the man, though it was clear to him, seeing that his own safety was at stake, that he would be amply justified in so doing. Why should he not put it to him and then be guided by circumstances? Nahoon was walking across a little open space about 10 feet ahead of him, where Hadden could see him very well, whilst he himself was under the shadow of a large tree with low horizontal branches running out from the trunk. "Nahoon," he said. The Zulu turned round and took a step towards him. "No, do not move, I pray. Stand where you are, or I shall be obliged to shoot you. Listen now. Do not be afraid, for I shall not fire without warning. I am your prisoner, and you are charged to take me back to the king to be his servant. But I believe that a war is going to break out between your people and mine, and this being so, you will understand that I do not wish to go to Cetywayo's kraal, because I should either come to a violent death there, or my own brothers will believe that I am a traitor and treat me accordingly. The Zulu border is not much more than an hour's journey away. Let us say an hour and a half's. I mean to be across it before the moon is up. Now, Nahoon, will you lose me in the forest and give me this hour and a half's start, or will you stop here with that ghost people of whom you talk? Do you understand? No, please do not move." "I understand you," answered the Zulu in a perfectly composed voice, "and I think that was a good name which we gave you this morning, though, Black Heart. There is some justice in your words, and more wisdom. Your opportunity is good, and one which a man named as you are should not let fall." "I am glad that you take this view of the matter, Nahoon. And now will you be so kind as to lose me, and to promise not to look for me till the moon is up?" "What do you mean, Black Heart?" "What I say. Come, I have no time to spare." "You are a strange man," said the Zulu reflectively. "You heard the king's order to me. Would you have me disobey the order of the king?" "Certainly I would. You have no reason to love Cetywayo, and it does not matter to you whether or no I return to his kraal to mend guns there. If you think that he will be angry because I am missing, you had better cross the border also. We can go together." "And leave my father and all my brethren to his vengeance? Blackheart, you do not understand. How can you, being so named? I am a soldier, and the king's word is the king's word. I hoped to have died fighting, but I am the bird in your noose. Come, shoot, or you will not reach the border before moonrise." And he opened his arms and smiled. "If it must be, so let it be. Farewell, Nahoon. At least you are a brave man, but every one of us must cherish his own life," answered Hadden calmly. Then with much deliberation he raised his rifle and covered the Zulu's breast. Already, whilst his victim stood there still smiling, although a twitching of his lips betrayed the natural terrors that no bravery can banish, already his finger was contracting on the trigger, when of a sudden, as instantly as though he had been struck by lightning, Hadden went down backwards, and behold, there stood upon him a great spotted beast, that waved its long tail to and fro, and glared down into his eyes. It was a leopard, a tiger as they call it in Africa, which, crouched upon a bough of the tree above, had been unable to resist the temptation of satisfying its savage appetite on the man below. For a second or two there was silence, broken only by the purring, or rather the snoring sound made by the leopard. In those seconds, strangely enough, there sprang up before Hadden's mental vision a picture of the Inyanga, called Inyosi, or the bee, her death-like head resting against the thatch of the hut, and her death-like lips muttering, "Think of my word when the great cat purrs above your face." Then the brute put out its strength. The claws of one paw it drove deep into the muscles of his left thigh, while with another it scratched at his breast, tearing the clothes from it and furrowing the flesh beneath. The sight of the white skin seemed to madden it, and in its fierce desire for blood it drooped its square muzzle and buried its fangs in its victim's shoulder. Next moment there was a sound of running feet and of a club falling heavily. Up reared the leopard with an angry snarl, up till it stood as high as the attacking Zulu. At him it came, striking out savagely and tearing the black man as it had torn the white. Again the Kiri fell full on its jaws, and down it went backwards, before it could rise again, or rather, as it was in the act of rising, the heavy knobstick struck it once more, and with fearful force, this time as it chanced, full on the nape of the neck, and paralysing the brute. It writhed and bit and twisted, throwing up the earth and leaves, while blow after blow was rained upon it, till at length with a convulsive struggle and a stifled roar it lay still, the brains oozing from its shattered skull. Hadden sat up, the blood running from his wounds. "You have saved my life, Nahoon," he said faintly, "and I thank you." "Do not thank me, Black Heart," answered the Zulu. "It was the king's word that I should keep you safely. Still, this tiger has been hardly dealt with, for certainly he has saved my life." And lifting the martini, he unloaded the rifle. At this juncture Hadden swooned away. 24 hours had gone by, when, after what seemed to him to be but a little time of troubled and dreamful sleep, through which he could hear voices without understanding what they said, and feel himself borne he knew not whither, Hadden awoke to find himself lying upon a kaross in a large and beautifully clean Kaffir hut with a bundle of furs for a pillow. There was a bowl of milk at his side, and tortured as he was by thirst, he tried to stretch out his arm to lift it to his lips, only to find, to his astonishment, that his hand fell back to his side like that of a dead man. Looking round the hut impatiently, he found that there was nobody in it to assist him, so he did the only thing which remained for him to do. He lay still. He did not fall asleep, but his eyes closed and a kind of gentle torpor crept over him, half obscuring his recovered senses. Presently he heard a soft voice speaking. It seemed far away, but he could clearly distinguish the words. "Black Heart still sleeps," the voice said, "but there is colour in his face. I think that he will wake soon and find his thoughts again." "Have no fear, Nanea. He will surely wake. His hurts are not dangerous," answered another voice, that of Nahoon. "He fell heavily with the weight of the tiger on top of him, and that is why his senses have been shaken for so long. He went near to death, but certainly he will not die." "It would have been a pity if he had died," answered the soft voice. "He is so beautiful. Never have I seen a white man who was so beautiful." "I did not think him beautiful when he stood with his rifle pointed at my heart," answered Nahoon sulkily. "Well, there is this to be said," she replied. "He wished to escape from Cetywayo, and that is not to be wondered at," and she sighed. "Moreover, he asked you to come with him, and it might have been well if you had done so, that is, if you would have taken me with you." "How could I have done it, girl?" he answered angrily. "Would you have me set at nothing the order of the king?" "The king!" she replied, raising her voice. "What do you owe to this king? You have served him faithfully, and your reward is that within a few days he will take me from you, me, who should have been your wife, and I must—" and she began to weep softly, adding between her sobs, "If you love me truly, you would think more of me and of yourself, and less of the Black One and his orders. Oh, let us fly, Nahoon, let us fly to Natal before the spear pierces me." "Weep not, Nanea," he said. "Why do you tear my heart in two between my duty and my love? You know that I am a soldier, and that I must walk the path wherein the king has set my feet. Soon I think I shall be dead, for I seek death, and then it will matter nothing. Nothing to you, Nahoon, who are at peace, but to me? Yet you are right, and I know it. Therefore forgive me, who am no warrior but a woman, who must also obey the will of the king." And she cast her arms about his neck, sobbing her fill upon his breast. End of chapter 3. Recording by Alvera. Chapter 4 of Black Heart and White Heart. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Recording by Alvera. Black Heart and White Heart by Sir Henry Rider Haggard. Chapter 4. Nanea. Presently, muttering something that the listener could not catch, Nahoon left Nanea and crept out of the hut by its bee-hole entrance. Then Hadden opened his eyes and looked round him. The sun was sinking, and a ray of its red light streaming through the little opening filled the place with a soft and crimson glow. In the centre of the hut, supporting it, stood a thornwood roof-tree, coloured black by the smoke of the fire, and against this, the rich light falling full upon her, leaned the girl Nanea, a very picture of gentle despair. As is occasionally the case among Zulu women, she was beautiful, so beautiful that the sight of her went straight to the white man's heart, for a moment causing the breath to catch in his throat. Her dress was very simple. On her shoulders, hanging open in front, lay a mantle of soft white stuff edged with blue beads. About her middle was a buckskin moocha, also embroidered with blue beads, while round her forehead and left knee were strips of grey fur, and on her right wrist a shining bangle of copper. Her naked bronze-hued figure was tall and perfect in its proportions, while her face had little in common with that of the ordinary native girl, showing as it did strong traces of the ancestral Arabian or Semitic blood. It was oval in shape, with delicate aquiline features, arched eyebrows, a full mouth that drooped a little at the corners, tiny ears, behind which the wavy coal-black hair hung down to the shoulders, and the very loveliest pair of dark and liquid eyes that it is possible to imagine. For a minute or more Nanea stood thus, her sweet face bathed in the sunbeam, while Hadden feasted his eyes upon its beauty. Then, sighing heavily, she turned, and seeing that he was awake, started, drew her mantle over her breast, and came, or rather glided, towards him. "The chief is awake," she said, in her soft Zulu accents. "Does he need aught?" "Yes, lady," he answered. "I need to drink, but alas, I am too weak." She knelt down beside him, and supporting him with her left arm, with her right held the gourd to his lips. How it came about Hadden never knew, but before that draught was finished, a change passed over him. Whether it was the savage girl's touch, or her strange and fawn-like loveliness, or the tender pity in her eyes, mattered not. The issue was the same. She struck some chord in his turbulent, uncurbed nature, and of a sudden it was filled full with passion for her, a passion which, if not elevated, at least was real. He did not for a moment mistake the significance of the flood of feeling that surged through his veins. Hadden never shirked facts. "By heaven," he said to himself. I have fallen in love with the black beauty at first sight, more in love than I have ever been before. It's awkward, but there will be compensations. So much the worse for Nahoon, or for Cetywayo, or for both of them. After all, I can always get rid of her if she becomes a nuisance. Then, in a fit of renewed weakness, brought about by the turmoil of his blood, he lay back upon the pillow of furs, watching Nanea's face while, with a native salve of pounded leaves, she busied herself dressing the wounds that the leopard had made. It almost seemed as though something of what was passing in his mind communicated itself to that of the girl. At least, her hand shook a little at her task, and getting done with it as quickly as she could, she rose from her knees with a courteous, "It is finished, in course," and once more took up her position by the roof-tree. "I thank you, lady," he said. "Your hand is kind." "You must not call me lady, in course," she answered. "I am no chieftainess, but only the daughter of a headman, Umgona." "And named Nanea," he said. "Nay, do not be surprised. I have heard of you. Well, Nanea, perhaps you will soon become a chieftainess, up at the king's kraal yonder." "Alas, and alas," she said, covering her face with her hands. "Do not grieve, Nanea. A hedge is never so tall and thick but that it cannot be climbed or crept through." She let fall her hands and looked at him eagerly, but he did not pursue the subject. "Tell me, how did I come here, Nanea?" "Nahoon and his companions carried you, in course." "Indeed, I begin to be thankful to the leopard that struck me down. Well, Nahoon is a brave man, and he has done me a great service. I trust that I may be able to repay it, to you, Nanea." This was the first meeting of Nanea and Hadden, but although she did not seek them, the necessities of his sickness and of the situation brought about many another. Never for a moment did the white man waver in his determination to get into his keeping the native girl who had captivated him, and to attain his end he brought to bear all his powers and charm to detach her from Nahoon and win her affections for himself. He was no rough wooer, however, but proceeded warily, weaving her about with a web of flattery and attention that must, he thought, produce the desired effect upon her mind. Without a doubt, indeed, it would have done so, for she was but a woman, and an untutored one, had it not been for a simple fact which dominated her whole nature. She loved Nahoon, and there was no room in her heart for any other man, white or black. To Hadden she was courteous and kindly, but no more, nor did she appear to notice any of the subtle advances by which he attempted to win a foothold in her heart. For a while this puzzled him, but he remembered that the Zulu women do not usually permit themselves to show feeling towards an undeclared suitor. Therefore it became necessary that he should speak out. His mind once made up, he had not to wait long for an opportunity. He was now quite recovered from his hurts and accustomed to walk in the neighbourhood of the kraal. About 200 yards from Umgona's huts rose a spring, and thither it was Nanea's habit to resort in the evening to bring back drinking water for the use of her father's household. The path between this spring and the kraal ran through a patch of bush, where on a certain afternoon towards sundown Hadden took his seat under a tree, having first seen Nanea go down to the little stream as was her custom. A quarter of an hour later she reappeared, carrying a large gourd upon her head. She wore no garment now except her moocha, for she had but one mantle and was afraid lest the water should splash it. He watched her advancing along the path, her hands resting on her hips, her splendid naked figure outlined against the westering sun, and wondered what excuse he could make to talk with her. As it chanced, fortune favoured him, for when she was near him a snake glided across the path in front of the girl's feet, causing her to spring backwards in alarm and overset the gourd of water. He came forward and picked it up. "Wait here," he said, laughing. "I will bring it to you full." "Nay, Inkoos," she remonstrated, "that is woman's work." "Among my people," he said, "the men love to work for the women," and he started for the spring, leaving her wondering. Before he reached her again, he regretted his gallantry, for it was necessary to carry the handleless gourd upon his shoulder, and the contents of it spilling over the edge soaked him. Of this, however, he said nothing to Nanea. "There is your water, Nanea. Shall I carry it for you to the kraal?" "Nay, Inkoos, I thank you, but give it to me. You are weary with its weight." "Stay a while, and I will accompany you. Ah, Nanea, I am still weak, and had it not been for you, I think that I should be dead." "It was Nahoon who saved you, not I, Inkoos." "Nahoon saved my body, but you, Nanea, you alone can save my heart." "You talk darkly, Inkoos." "Then I must make my meaning clear, Nanea. I love you." She opened her brown eyes wide. "You, a white lord, love me, a Zulu girl? How can that be?" "I do not know, Nanea, but it is so, and were you not blind you would have seen it. I love you, and I wish to take you to wife." "Nay, Inkoos, it is impossible. I am already betrothed." "Ay," he answered, "betrothed to the king." "No, betrothed to Nahoon." "But it is the king who will take you within a week, is it not so? And would you not rather that I should take you than the king?" "It seems to be so, Inkoos. I would rather go with you than with the king, but most of all I desire to marry Nahoon. It may be that I shall not be able to marry him, but if that is so, at least I will never become one of the king's women." "How will you prevent it, Nanea?" "There are waters in which a maid may drown, and trees upon which she can hang," she answered, with a quick setting of the mouth. "That were a pity, Nanea. You are too fair to die." "Fair or foul, yet I die, Inkoos. No, no, come with me. I will find a way, and be my wife." And he put his arm about her waist and strove to draw her to him. Without any violence of movement, and with the most perfect dignity, the girl disengaged herself from his embrace. "You have honoured me, and I thank you, Inkoos," she said quietly, "but you do not understand. I am the wife of Nahoon. I belong to Nahoon. Therefore I cannot look on any other man while Nahoon lives. It is not our custom, Inkoos, for we are not as the white woman, but ignorant and simple, and when we vow ourselves to a man, we abide by that vow till death." "Indeed," said Hadden, "and so now you go to tell Nahoon that I have offered to make you my wife." "No, Inkoos, why should I tell Nahoon your secrets? I have said nay to you, not yea, therefore he has no right to know," and she stooped to lift the gourd of water. Hadden considered the situation rapidly, for his repulse only made him the more determined to succeed. Of a sudden, under the emergency, he conceived a scheme, or rather its rough outline. It was not a nice scheme, and some men might have shrunk from it, but as he had no intention of suffering himself to be defeated by a Zulu girl, he decided, with regret it is true, that having failed to attain his ends by means which he considered fair, he must resort to others of more doubtful character. "Nanea," he said, "you are a good and honest woman, and I respect you. As I have told you, I love you also, but if you refuse to listen to me there is nothing more to be said, and, after all, perhaps it would be better that you should marry one of your own people. But, Nanea, you will never marry him, for the king will take you, and if he does not give you to some other man, either you will become one of his sisters, or to be free of him, as you say, you will die. Now hear me, for it is because I love you and wish your welfare that I speak thus. Why do you not escape into Natal, taking Nahoon with you? For there, as you know, you may live in peace, out of reach of the arm of Cetywayo." "That is my desire, in course, but Nahoon will not consent. He says that there is to be war between us and you white men, and he will not break the command of the king and desert from his army." "Then he cannot love you much, Nanea, and at least you have to think of yourself. Whisper into the ear of your father, and fly together, for be sure that Nahoon will soon follow you. Ay, and I myself will fly with you, for I too believe that there must be war, and then a white man in this country will be as a lamb among the eagles. If Nahoon will come, I will go, in course, but I cannot fly without Nahoon. It is better I should stay here and kill myself. Surely then, being so fair and loving him so well, you can teach him to forget his folly and to escape with you. In 4 days' time we must start for the king's kraal, and if you win over Nahoon, it will be easy for us to turn our faces southwards and across the river that lies between the land of the Amazulu and Natal. For the sake of all of us, but most of all for your own sake, try to do this, Nanea, whom I have loved and whom I now would save. See him and plead with him as you know how, but as yet do not tell him that I dream of flight, for then I should be watched." "In truth I will, in course," she answered earnestly, "and oh, I thank you for your goodness. Fear not that I will betray you. First I would die. Farewell." "Farewell, Nanea," and taking her hand he raised it to his lips. Late that night, just as Hadden was beginning to prepare himself for sleep, he heard a gentle tapping at the board which closed the entrance to his hut. "Enter," he said, unfastening the door, and presently, by the light of the little lantern that he had with him, he saw Nanea creep into the hut, followed by the great form of Nahoon. "In course," she said in a whisper when the door was closed again, "I have pleaded with Nahoon, and he has consented to fly. Moreover, my father will come also." "Is it so, Nahoon?" asked Hadden. "It is so," answered the Zulu, looking down shamefacedly. "To save this girl from the king, and because the love of her eats out my heart, I have bartered away my honour. But I tell you, Nanea, and you, white man, as I told Umgona just now, that I think no good will come of this flight, and if we are caught or betrayed, we shall be killed, every one of us." "Caught we can scarcely be," broke in Nanea anxiously, "for who could betray us, except the Inkoos here?" "Which he is not likely to do," said Hadden quietly, "seeing that he desires to escape with you, and that his life is also at stake." "That is so, Blackheart," said Nahoon, "otherwise I tell you that I should not have trusted you." Hadden took no notice of this outspoken saying, but until very late that night they sat there together making their plans. On the following morning Hadden was awakened by sounds of violent altercation. Going out of his hut, he found that the disputants were Umgona and a fat and evil-looking Kaffir chief who had arrived at the kraal on a pony. This chief, he soon discovered, was named Maputa, being none other than the man who had sought Nanea in marriage and brought about Nahoon's and Umgona's unfortunate appeal to the king. At present he was engaged in abusing Umgona furiously, charging him with having stolen certain of his oxen and bewitched his cows so that they would not give milk. The alleged theft it was comparatively easy to disprove, but the wizardry remained a matter of argument. "You are a dog, and a son of a dog," shouted Maputa, shaking his fat fist in the face of the trembling but indignant Umgona. "You promised me your daughter in marriage. Then, having vowed her to that Umfagozan, that low lout of a soldier, Nahoon, the son of Zomba, you went, the two of you, and poisoned the king's ear against me, bringing me into trouble with the king, and now you have bewitched my cattle. Well, wait, I will be even with you, wizard. Wait till you wake up in the cold morning to find your fence red with fire, and the slayers standing outside your gates to eat up you and yours with spears." At this juncture, Nahoon, who till now had been listening in silence, intervened with effect. "Good," he said, "we will wait, but not in your company, Chief Maputa. Hamba," which means go, and seizing the fat old ruffian by the scruff of his neck, he flung him backwards with such violence that he rolled over and over down the little slope. Hadden laughed and passed on towards the stream, where he proposed to bathe. Just as he reached it, he caught sight of Maputa riding along the footpath, his head ring covered with mud, his lips purple, and his black face livid with rage. "There goes an angry man," he said to himself. "Now how would it be?" And he looked upwards like one seeking an inspiration. It seemed to come. Perhaps the devil, finding it open, whispered in his ear. At any rate, in a few seconds his plan was formed, and he was walking through the bush to meet Maputa. "Go in peace, Chief," he said. "They seem to have treated you roughly up yonder. Having no power to interfere, I came away, for I could not bear the sight. It is indeed shameful that an old and venerable man of rank should be struck into the dirt and beaten by a soldier drunk with beer." "Shameful, white man," gasped Maputa. "Your words are true indeed, but wait a while. I, Maputa, will roll that stone over. I will throw that bull upon its back. When next the harvest ripens, this I promise, that neither Nahoon nor Umgona nor any of his kraal shall be left to gather it." "And how will you manage that, Maputa?" "I do not know, but I will find a way. Oh, I tell you, a way shall be found." Hadden patted the pony's neck meditatively. Then leaning forward, he looked the chief in the eyes and said, "What will you give me, Maputa, if I show you that way, a sure and certain one, whereby you may be avenged to the death upon Nahoon, whose violence I also have seen, and upon Umgona, whose witchcraft brought sore sickness upon me?" "What reward do you seek, white man?" asked Maputa eagerly. "A little thing, Chief, a thing of no account, only the girl Nanea, to whom, as it chances, I have taken a fancy." "I wanted her for myself, white man, but he who sits at Ulundi has laid his hand upon her." "That is nothing, Chief. I can arrange with him who sits at Ulundi. It is with you who are great here that I wish to come to terms. Listen, if you grant my desire, not only will I fulfill yours upon your foes, but when the girl is delivered into my hands, I will give you this rifle and 100 rounds of cartridges." Maputa looked at the sporting Martini, and his eyes glistened. "It is good," he said. "It is very good. Often have I wished for such a gun that will enable me to shoot game and to talk with my enemies from far away. Promise it to me, white man, and you shall take the girl if I can give her to you. You swear it, Maputa?" "I swear it by the head of Shaka and the spirits of my fathers." "Good. At dawn on the 4th day from now, it is the purpose of Umgona, his daughter Nanea, and Nahoon to cross the river into Natal by the drift that is called Crocodile Drift, taking their cattle with them and flying from the king. I also shall be of their company, for they know that I have learned their secret, and would murder me if I tried to leave them. Now you who are chief of the border and guardian of that drift must hide at night with some men among the rocks in the shallows of the drift and await our coming. First Nanea will cross, driving the cows and calves, for so it is arranged, and I shall help her. Then will follow Umgona and Nahoon with the oxen and heifers. On these two you must fall, killing them and capturing the cattle, and afterwards I will give you the rifle." "What if the king should ask for the girl, white man?" "Then you shall answer that in the uncertain light you did not recognize her, and so she slipped away from you. Moreover, that at first you feared to seize the girl, lest her cries should alarm the men and they should escape you. Good, but how can I be sure that you will give me the gun once you are across the river? Thus, before I enter the ford, I will lay the rifle and cartridges upon a stone by the bank, telling Nanea that I shall return to fetch them when I have driven over the cattle. It is well, white man, I will not fail you." So the plot was made, and after some further conversations upon points of detail, the two conspirators shook hands and parted. "That ought to come off all right," reflected Hadden to himself, as he plunged and floated in the waters of the stream. "But somehow I don't quite trust our friend Maputa. It would have been better if I could have relied upon myself to get rid of Nahoon and his respected uncle. A couple of shots would do it in the water. But then that would be murder, and murder is unpleasant, whereas the other thing is only the delivery to justice of two base deserters, a laudable action in a military country. Also, personal interference upon my part might turn the girl against me, while after Umgona and Nahoon have been wiped out by Maputa, she must accept my escort. Of course there is a risk, but in every walk of life the most cautious have to take risks at times. As it chanced, Philip Hadden was correct in his suspicions of his coadjutor, Maputa. Even before that worthy chief reached his own kraal, he had come to the conclusion that the white man's plan, though attractive in some ways, was too dangerous, since it was certain that if the girl Nanea escaped, the king would be indignant. Moreover, the men he took with him to do the killing in the drift would suspect something and talk. On the other hand, he would earn much credit with his majesty by revealing the plot, saying that he had learned it from the lips of the white hunter whom Umgona and Nahoon had forced to participate in it, and of whose coveted rifle he must trust to chance to possess himself. An hour later, two discreet messengers were bounding across the plains, bearing words from the chief Maputa, the warden of the border, to the great black elephant at Ulundi. End of chapter 4. Recording by Elvira. Chapter 5 of Black Heart and White Heart by Sir Henry Rider Haggard. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elvira. The Doom Pool. Fortune showed itself strangely favorable to the plans of Nahoon and Nanea. One of the Zulu captain's perplexities was as to how he should lull the suspicions and evade the vigilance of his own companions, who, together with himself, had been detailed by the king to assist Hadden in his hunting, and to guard against his escape. As it chanced, however, on the day after the incident of the visit of Maputa, a messenger arrived from no less a person than the great military induna Cetywayo Kamarolo, who afterwards commanded the Zulu army at Isandlwana, ordering these men to return to their regiment, the Umtityu Corps, which was to be placed upon full war footing. Accordingly, Nahoon sent them, saying that he himself would follow with Blackheart in the course of a few days, as at present the white man was not sufficiently recovered from his hurts to allow of his travelling fast and far. So the soldiers went, doubting nothing. Then Umgona gave it out that in obedience to the command of the king he was about to start for Ulundi, taking with him his daughter Nanea, to be delivered over into the Sikotla, and also those 15 head of cattle that had been lobolaed by Nahoon in consideration of his forthcoming marriage, whereof he had been fined by Cetywayo. Under pretence that they required a change of felt, the rest of his cattle he sent away in charge of a Basutu herd who knew nothing of their plans, telling him to keep them by the crocodile drift, as there the grass was good and sweet. All preparations being completed, on the third day the party started, heading straight for Ulundi. After they had travelled some miles, however, they left the road and turning sharp to the right, passed unobserved of any through a great stretch of uninhabited bush. Their path now lay not far from the Pool of Doom, which indeed was close to Umgona's kraal, and the forest that was called Home of the Dead, but out of sight of these. It was their plan to travel by night, reaching the broken country near the Crocodile Drift on the following morning. Here they proposed to lie hid that day and through the night, then, having first collected the cattle which had preceded them, to cross the river at the break of dawn and escape into Natal. At least this was the plan of his companions, but, as we know, Hadden had another program, whereon after one last appearance, two of the party would play no part. During that long afternoon's journey, Umgona, who knew every inch of the country, walked ahead, driving the 15 cattle and carrying in his hand a long travelling stick of black and white umzimbeet wood, for in truth the old man was in a hurry to reach his journey's end. Next came Nahoon, armed with a broad assegai, but naked except for his moocha and necklet of baboon's teeth, and with them Nanea in her white bead-bordered mantle. Hadden, who brought up the rear, noticed that the girl seemed to be under the spell of an imminent apprehension, for from time to time she clasped her lover's arm, and looking up into his face addressed him with vehemence, almost with passion. Curiously enough, the sight touched Hadden, and once or twice he was shaken by so sharp a pang of remorse at the thought of his share in this tragedy, that he cast about in his mind seeking a means to unravel the web of death which he himself had woven. But ever that evil voice was whispering at his ear. It reminded him that he, the white Inkosi, had been refused by this dusky beauty, and that if he found a way to save him, within some few hours she would be the wife of the savage gentleman at her side, the man who had named him Black Heart, and who despised him, the man whom he had meant to murder, and who immediately repaid his treachery by rescuing him from the jaws of the leopard at the risk of his own life. Moreover, it was a law of Hadden's existence never to deny himself of anything that he desired, if it lay within his power to take it, a law which had led him always deeper into sin. In other respects, indeed, it had not carried him far, for in the past he had not desired much, and he had won little. But this particular flower was to his hand, and he would pluck it. If Nahoon stood between him and the flower, so much the worse for Nahoon, and if it should wither in his grasp, so much the worse for the flower. It could always be thrown away. Thus it came about that, not for the first time in his life, Philip Hadden discarded the somewhat spasmodic prickings of conscience, and listened to that evil whispering at his ear. About 5:30 o'clock in the afternoon, the four refugees passed the stream that a mile or so down fell over the little precipice into the Doom Pool, and entering a patch of thorn trees on the further side, walked straight into the midst of 22 soldiers, who were beguiling the tedium of expectancy by the taking of snuff and the smoking of dacha, or native hemp. With these soldiers, seated on his pony, for he was too fat to walk, waited the chief Maputa. Observing that their expected guests had arrived, the men knocked out the dacha pipe, replaced the snuff boxes in the slits made in the lobes of their ears, and secured the four of them. "What is the meaning of this, O King's soldiers?" asked Umgona in a quavering voice. "We journey to the kraal of Cetywayo. Why do you molest us?" "Indeed. Wherefore then are your faces set towards the south? Does the Black One live in the south? Well, you will journey to another kraal presently," answered the jovial-looking captain of the party with a callous laugh. "I do not understand," stammered Umgona. "Then I will explain while you rest," said the captain. "The chief Maputa yonder sent word to the Black One at Ulundi that he had heard of your intended flight to Natal from the lips of this white man, who had warned him of it. The Black One was angry, and dispatched us to catch you and make an end of you. that is all. Come on now, quietly, and let us finish the matter. As the doom pool is near, your deaths will be easy." Nahoon heard the words, and sprang straight at the throat of Hadden, but he did not reach it, for the soldiers pulled him down. Nanea heard them also, and turning, looked the traitor in the eyes. She said nothing, she only looked, but he could never forget that look. The white man, for his part, was filled with a fiery indignation against Maputa. "You wicked villain!" he gasped, whereat the chief smiled in a sickly fashion and turned away. Then they were marched along the banks of the stream till they reached the waterfall that fell into the pool of doom. Hadden was a brave man after his fashion, but his heart quailed as he gazed into that abyss. "Are you going to throw me in there?" he asked of the Zulu captain in a thick voice. "You, white man?" replied the soldier unconcernedly. "No, our orders are to take you to the king, but what he will do with you I do not know. There is to be war between your people and ours, so perhaps he means to pound you into medicine for the use of the witch doctors, or to peg you over an ant-heap as a warning to other white men." Hadden received this information in silence, but its effect upon his brain was bracing, for instantly he began to search out some means of escape. By now the party had halted near the 2 thorn trees that hung over the waters of the pool. "Who dives first?" asked the captain of the chief Maputa. "The old wizard," he replied, nodding at Umgona, "then his daughter after him, and last of all this fellow," and he struck Nahoon in the face with his open hand. "Come on, wizard," said the captain, grasping Umgona by the arm, "and let us see how you can swim." At the words of doom, Umgona seemed to recover his self-command, after the fashion of his race. "No need to lead me, soldier," he said, shaking himself loose, "who am old and ready to die." Then he kissed his daughter at his side, wrung Nahoon by the hand, and turning from Hadden with a gesture of contempt, walked out upon the platform that joined the 2 thorn trunks. Here he stood for a moment, looking at the setting sun. Then suddenly and without a sound he hurled himself into the abyss below and vanished. "That was a brave one," said the captain with admiration. "Can you spring too, girl, or must we throw you?" "I can walk my father's path," Nanea answered faintly, "but first I crave leave to say one word. It is true that we were escaping from the king, and therefore by the law we must die, but it was Black Heart here who made the plot, and he who has betrayed us. Would you know why he has betrayed us? Because he sought my favour, and I refused him, and this is the vengeance that he takes, a white man's vengeance." "How?" broke in the chief Maputa. "This pretty one speaks truth, for the white man would have made a bargain with me under which Umgona, the wizard, and Nahoon, the soldier, were to be killed at the Crocodile Drift, and he himself suffered to escape with the girl. I spoke him softly and said yes, and then like a loyal man I reported to the king." "You hear?" sighed Nanea. "Nahoon, fare you well, though presently perhaps we shall be together again. It was I who tempted you from your duty. For my sake you forgot your honour, and I am repaid. Farewell, my husband. It is better to die with you than to enter the house of the king's women." And Nanea stepped onto the platform. Here, holding to a bough of one of the thorn trees, she turned and addressed Hadden, saying, "Black Heart, you seem to have won the day, but me, at least, you lose. The sun is not yet set. After sunset comes the night, Black Heart, and in that night I pray that you may wander eternally, and be given to drink of my blood, and the blood of Umgona my father, and the blood of Nahoon my husband, who saved your life, and whom you have murdered. Perchance, Black Heart, we may yet meet yonder in the house of the dead." Then, uttering a low cry, Nanea clasped her hands and sprang upwards and outwards from the platform. The watchers bent their heads forward to look. They saw her rush headlong down the face of the fall to strike the water 50 feet below. A few seconds, and for the last time they caught sight of her white garment glimmering on the surface of the gloomy pool. Then the shadows and mist wreaths hid it, and she was gone. "Now, husband," cried the cheerful voice of the captain, "yonder is your marriage bed, so be swift to follow a bride who is so ready to lead the way. How, but you are good people to kill. Never have I had to do with any who gave less trouble. You—" and he stopped, for mental agony had done its work, and suddenly Nahoon went mad before his eyes. With a roar like that of a lion, the great man cast off those who held him, and seizing one of them round the waist and thigh, he put out all his terrible strength. Lifting him as though he had been an infant, he hurled him over the edge of the cliff to find his death on the rocks of the Pool of Doom. Then crying, "Black Heart, your turn! Black Heart, the traitor!" he rushed at Hadden, his eyes rolling and foam flying from his lips, as he passed, striking the chief Maputa from his horse with a backward blow of his hand. Ill would it have gone with the white man if Nahoon had caught him. But he could not come at him, for the soldiers sprang upon him, and notwithstanding his fearful struggles, they pulled him to the ground, as at certain festivals the Zulu regiments with their naked hands pull down a bull in the presence of the king. "Cast him over before he can work more mischief," said a voice. But the captain cried out, "Nay, nay, he is sacred. The fire from heaven has fallen on his brain, and we may not harm him, else evil would overtake us all. Bind him hand and foot, and bear him tenderly to where he can be cared for. Surely I thought that these evildoers were giving us too little trouble, and thus it is proved." So they set themselves to make fast Nahoon's hands and wrists, using as much gentleness as they might, for among the Zulus a lunatic is accounted holy. It was no easy task, and it took time. Hadden glanced around him, and saw his opportunity. On the ground close beside him lay his rifle, where one of the soldiers had placed it, and about a dozen yards away Maputa's pony was grazing. With a swift movement he seized the martini, and 5 seconds later he was on the back of the pony heading for the Crocodile Drift at a gallop. So quickly indeed did he execute his masterly retreat, that occupied as they all were in binding Nahoon, for half a minute or more none of the soldiers noticed what had happened. Then Maputa chanced to see, and waddled after him to the top of the rise, screaming, "The white thief! He has stolen my horse, and the gun too, the gun that he promised to give me." Hadden, who by this time was 100 yards away, heard him clearly, and a rage filled his heart. This man had made an open murderer of him. More, he had been the means of robbing him of the girl, for whose sake he had dipped his hands in these iniquities. He glanced over his shoulder. Maputa was still running, and alone. Yes, there was time. At any rate, he would risk it. Pulling up the pony with a jerk, he leapt from its back, slipping his arm through the rein with an almost simultaneous movement. As it chanced, and as he had hoped would be the case, the animal was a trained shooting horse, and stood still. Hadden planted his feet firmly on the ground, and drawing a deep breath, he cocked the rifle and covered the advancing chief. Now Maputa saw his purpose, and with a yell of terror turned to fly. Hadden waited a second to get the sight fair on his broad back. Then, just as the soldiers appeared above the rise, he pressed the trigger. He was a noted shot, and in this instance his skill did not fail him, for before he heard the bullet tell, Maputa flung his arms wide and plunged to the ground dead. 3 seconds more, and with a savage curse, Hadden had remounted the pony and was riding for his life towards the river, which a while later he crossed in safety. End of chapter 5. Recording by Elvira. Chapter 6 of Blackheart and Whiteheart. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elvira. Blackheart and Whiteheart by Sir Henry Rider Haggard. Chapter 6. The Ghost of the Dead. When Nanea leapt from the dizzy platform that overhung the pool of doom, a strange fortune befell her. Close in to the precipice were many jagged rocks, and on these the waters of the fall fell and thundered, bounding from them in spouts of spray into the troubled depths of the foss beyond. It was on these stones that the life was dashed out from the bodies of the wretched victims who were hurled from above. But Nanea, it will be remembered, had not waited to be treated thus, and as it chanced, the strong spring with which she had leapt to death carried her clear of the rocks. By a very little she missed the edge of them, and striking the deep water head first like some practised diver, she sank down and down until she thought that she would never rise again. Yet she did rise, at the end of the pool, in the mouth of the rapid, along which she sped swiftly, carried down by the rush of the water. Fortunately there were no rocks here, and since she was a skilful swimmer, she escaped the danger of being thrown against the banks. For a long distance she was borne thus, till at length she saw that she was in a forest, for trees cut off the light from the water, and their drooping branches swept its surface. One of these Nanea caught with her hand, and by the help of it she dragged herself from the river of death, whence none had escaped before. Now she stood upon the bank gasping, but quite unharmed. There was not a scratch on her body, even her white garment was still fast about her neck. But though she had suffered no hurt in her terrible voyage, so exhausted was Nanea that she could scarcely stand. Here the gloom was that of night, and shivering with cold, she looked helplessly to find some refuge. Close to the water's edge grew an enormous yellowwood tree, and to this she staggered, thinking to climb it and seek shelter in its boughs, where, as she hoped, she would be safe from wild beasts. Again fortune befriended her, for at a distance of a few feet from the ground there was a great hole in the tree, which she discovered was hollow. Into this hole she crept, taking her chance of its being the home of snakes or other evil creatures, to find that the interior was wide and warm. It was dry also, for at the bottom of the cavity lay a foot or more of rotten tinder and moss, brought there by rats or birds. Upon this tinder she lay down, and covering herself with the moss and leaves, soon sank into sleep or stupor. How long Nanea slept she did not know, but at length she was awakened by a sound as of guttural human voices, talking in a language that she could not understand. Rising to her knees, she peered out of the hole in the tree. It was night, but the stars shone brilliantly, and their light fell upon an open circle of ground close by the edge of the river. In this circle there burned a great fire, and at a little distance from the fire were gathered 8 or 10 horrible-looking beings, who appeared to be rejoicing over something that lay upon the ground. They were small in stature, men and women together, but no children, and all of them were nearly naked. Their hair was long and thin, growing down almost to the eyes. Their jaws and teeth protruded, and the girth of their black bodies was out of all proportion to their height. In their hands they held sticks with sharp stones lashed to them, or rude hatchet-like knives of the same material. Now Nanea's heart sank within her, and she nearly fainted with fear, for she knew that she was in the haunted forest, and without a doubt these were the Esemkofu, The evil ghosts that dwelt therein. Yes, that was what they were, and yet she could not take her eyes off them. The sight of them held her with a horrible fascination. But if they were ghosts, why did they sing and dance like men? Why did they wave those sharp stones aloft, and quarrel and strike each other? And why did they make a fire as men do when they wish to cook food? More, what was it that they rejoiced over, that long dark thing which lay so quiet upon the ground? It did not look like a head of game, and it could scarcely be a crocodile, yet clearly it was food of some sort, for they were sharpening the stone knives in order to cut it up. While she wondered thus, one of the dreadful-looking little creatures advanced to the fire, and taking from it a burning bough, held it over the thing that lay upon the ground, to give light to a companion who was about to do something to it with the stone knife. Next instant Nanea drew back her head from the hole, a stifled shriek upon her lips. She saw what it was now. It was the body of a man. Yes, and these were no ghosts. They were cannibals, of whom when she was little her mother had told her tales to keep her from wandering away from home. But who was the man they were about to eat? It could not be one of themselves, for his stature was much greater. Oh, now she knew it must be Nahoon, who had been killed up yonder, and whose dead body the waters had brought down to the haunted forest, as they had brought her alive. Yes, it must be Nahoon, and she would be forced to see her husband devoured before her eyes. The thought of it overwhelmed her. That he should die by order of the king was natural, but that he should be buried thus. Yet what could she do to prevent it? Well, if it cost her her life, it should be prevented. At the worst, they could only kill and eat her also, and now that Nahoon and her father were gone, being untroubled by any religious or spiritual hopes and fears, she was not greatly concerned to keep her own breath in her. Slipping through the hole in the tree, Nanea walked quietly towards the cannibals, not knowing in the least what she should do when she reached them. As she arrived in line with the fire, this lack of program came home to her mind forcibly, and she paused to reflect. Just then one of the cannibals looked up to see a tall and stately figure, wrapped in a white garment, which, as the flame-light flickered on it, seemed now to advance from the dense background of shadow, and now to recede into it. The poor savage wretch was holding a stone knife in his teeth when he beheld her, but it did not remain there long, for opening his great jaws, he uttered the most terrified and piercing yell that Nanea had ever heard. Then the others saw her also, and presently the forest was ringing with shrieks of fear. For a few seconds the outcasts stood and gazed. Then they were gone this way and that, bursting their path through the undergrowth like startled jackals. The Esemkofu of Zulu tradition had been routed in their own haunted home by what they took to be a spirit. Poor Esemkofu! They were but miserable and starving bushmen, who, driven into that place of ill omen many years ago, had adopted this means, the only one open to them, to keep the life in their wretched bodies. Here at least they were unmolested, and as there was little other food to be found amidst that wilderness of trees, they took what the river brought them. When executions were few in the pool of doom, times were hard for them indeed, for then they were driven to eat each other. That is why there were no children. As their inarticulate outcry died away in the distance, Nanea ran forward to look at the body that lay on the ground, and staggered back with a sigh of relief. It was not Nahoon, but she recognized the face for that of one of the party of executioners. How did he come here? Had Nahoon killed him? Had Nahoon escaped? She could not tell, and at the best it was improbable, but still the sight of this dead soldier lit her heart with a faint ray of hope, for how did he come to be dead, if Nahoon had no hand in his death? She could not bear to leave him lying so near her hiding place, however. Therefore, with no small toil, she rolled the corpse back into the water which carried it swiftly away. Then she returned to the tree, having first replenished the fire and awaited the light. At last it came, so much of it as ever penetrated this darksome den, and Nanea, becoming aware that she was hungry, descended from the tree to search for food. All day long she searched, finding nothing, till towards sunset she remembered that on the outskirts of the forest there was a flat rock, where it was the custom of those who had been in any way afflicted, or who considered themselves or their belongings to be bewitched, to place propitiatory offerings of food, wherewith the Esemkofu and Amahlosi were supposed to satisfy their spiritual cravings. Urged by the pinch of starvation, to this spot Nanea journeyed rapidly, and found to her joy that some neighbouring kraal had evidently been in recent trouble, for the rock of offering was laden with cobs of corn, gourds of milk, porridge, and even meat. Helping herself to as much as she could carry, she returned to her lair, where she drank of the milk and cooked meat and mealies at the fire. Then she crept back into the tree and slept. For nearly 2 months Nanea lived thus in the forest, since she could not venture out of it, fearing lest she should be seized, and for a second time taste of the judgment of the king. In the forest at least she was safe, for none dared enter there, nor did the Esemkofu give her further trouble. Once or twice she saw them, but on each occasion they fled from her presence, seeking some distant retreat, where they hid themselves or perished. Nor did food fail her, for finding that it was taken, the pious givers brought it in plenty to the rock of offering. But oh, the life was dreadful, and the gloom and loneliness coupled with her sorrows at times drove her almost to insanity. Still she lived on, though often she desired to die, for if her father was dead, the corpse she had found was not the corpse of Nahoon, and in her heart there still shone that spark of hope. Yet what she hoped for she could not tell. When Philip Hadden reached civilized regions, he found that war was about to be declared between the Queen and Cetywayo, king of the Amazulu, also that in the prevailing excitement his little adventure with the Utrecht storekeeper had been overlooked or forgotten. He was the owner of 2 good buck-wagons with spans of salted oxen, and at that time vehicles were much in request to carry military stores for the columns which were to advance into Zululand. Indeed, the transport authorities were glad to pay £90 a month for the hire of each wagon, and to guarantee the owners against all loss of cattle. Although he was not desirous of returning to Zululand, this bait proved too much for Hadden, who accordingly leased out his wagons to the commissariat, together with his own services as conductor and interpreter. He was attached to No. 3 column of the invading force, which it may be remembered was under the immediate command of Lord Chelmsford, and on the 20th of January 1879 he marched with it by the road that runs from Rorke's Drift to the Indeni forest, and encamped that night beneath the shadow of the steep and desolate mountain known as Isandlwana. That day also a great army of King Cetywayo's, numbering 20,000 men and more, moved down from the Upindo hill and camped upon the stony plain that lies 1.5 miles to the east of Isandlwana. No fires were lit, and it lay there in utter silence, for the warriors were sleeping on their spears. With that impi was the Umcityu regiment, 3,500 strong. At the first break of dawn, the Induna in command of the Umcityu looked up from beneath the shelter of the black shield with which he had covered his body, and through the thick mist he saw a great man standing before him, clothed only in a mucha, a gaunt, wild-eyed man, who held a rough club in his hand. When he was spoken to, the man made no answer. He only leaned upon his club, looking from left to right along the dense array of innumerable shields. "Who is this Silwana, wild creature?" asked the Induna of his captains, wondering. The captains stared at the wanderer, and one of them replied, "This is Nahoon Kazomba. It is the son of Zomba, who not long ago held rank in this regiment of the Umcityu. His betrothed, Nanea, daughter of Umgona, was killed together with her father by order of the Black One, and Nahoon went mad with grief at the sight of it, for the fire of heaven entered his brain, and mad he has wandered ever since." "What would you here, Nahoon ka Zomba?" asked the Induna. Then Nahoon spoke slowly. "My regiment goes down to war against the white men. Give me a shield and a spear, O captain of the king, that I may fight with my regiment, for I seek a face in the battle." So they gave him a shield and a spear, for they dared not turn away one whose brain was alight with the fire of heaven. When the sun was high that day, bullets began to fall among the ranks of the Umcityu. Then the black-shielded, black-plumed Umcityu arose, company by company, and after them arose the whole vast Zulu army, breast and horns together, and swept down in silence upon the doomed British camp, a moving sheen of spears. The bullets pattered on the shields, the shells tore long lines through their array, but they never halted or wavered. Forward on either side shot out the horns of armed men, clasping the camp in an embrace of steel. Then, as these began to close, out burst the war cry of the Zulus, and with the roar of a torrent, and the rush of a storm, with a sounding like the humming of 1,000,000,000 bees, wave after wave, the deep breast of the impi rolled down upon the white man. With it went the black-shielded Umcityu, and with them went Nahoon, the son of Zomba. A bullet struck him in the side, glancing from his ribs. He did not heed. A white man fell from his horse before him. He did not stab, for he sought but one face in the battle. He sought, and at last he found. There among the wagons, where the spears were busiest, there stood by his horse and firing rapidly was Black Heart, he who had given Nanea, his betrothed, to death. 3 soldiers stood between them. One of them Nahoon stabbed, and 2 he brushed aside. Then he rushed straight at Hadden. But the white man saw him come, and even through the mask of his madness he knew Nahoon again, and terror took hold of him. Throwing away his empty rifle, for his ammunition was spent, he leaped upon his horse and drove his spurs into its flanks. Away it went among the carnage, springing over the dead and bursting through the lines of shields, and after it came Nahoon, running long and low, with head stretched forward and trailing spear, running as a hound runs when the buck is at view. Hadden's first plan was to head for Rorke's Drift, but a glance to the left showed him that the masses of the Undi barred that way, so he fled straight on, leaving his path to fortune. In 5 minutes he was over a ridge, and there was nothing of the battle to be seen. In 10 all sounds of it had died away, for few guns were fired in the dread race to Fugitives' Drift, and the assegai makes no noise. In some strange fashion, even at this moment, the contrast between the dreadful scene of blood and turmoil that he had left, and the peaceful face of nature over which he was passing, came home to his brain vividly. Here birds sang and cattle grazed. Here the sun shone, undimmed by the smoke of cannon. Only high up in the blue and silent air, long streams of vultures could be seen, winging their way to the plain of Isandlwana. The ground was very rough, and Hadden's horse began to tire. He looked over his shoulder. There, some 200 yards behind, came the Zulu, grim as death, unswerving as fate. He examined the pistol in his belt. There was but one undischarged cartridge left. All the rest had been fired, and the pouch was empty. Well, 1 bullet should be enough for one savage. The question was, should he stop and use it now? No, he might miss or fail to kill the man. He was on horseback, and his foe on foot. Surely he could tire him out. A while passed, and they dashed through a little stream. It seemed familiar to Hadden. Yes, that was the pool where he used to bathe when he was the guest of Umgona, the father of Nanea, and there on the knoll to his right were the huts, or rather the remains of them, for they had been burnt with fire. What chance had brought him to this place, he wondered. Then again he looked behind him at Nahoon, who seemed to read his thoughts, for he shook his spear and pointed to the ruined kraal. On he went at speed, for here the land was level, and to his joy he lost sight of his pursuer. But presently there came a mile of rocky ground, and when it was past, glancing back, he saw that Nahoon was once more in his old place. His horse's strength was almost spent, but Hadden spurred it forward blindly, whither he knew not. Now he was travelling along a strip of turf, and ahead of him he heard the music of a river, while to his left rose a high bank. Presently the turf bent inwards, and there, not 20 yards away from him, was a Kaffir hut standing on the brink of a river. He looked at it. Yes, it was the hut of that accursed Inyanga, the bee, and standing by the fence of it was none other than the bee herself. At the sight of her, the exhausted horse swerved violently, stumbled and came to the ground, where it lay panting. Hadden was thrown from the saddle, but sprang to his feet unhurt. "Ah, Blackheart, is it you? What news of the battle, Blackheart?" cried the bee in a mocking voice. "Help me, mother, I am pursued," he gasped. "What of it, Blackheart? It is but by one tired man. Stand then and face him, for now Blackheart and Whiteheart are together again." "You will not? Then away to the forest, and seek shelter among the dead who await you there. Tell me, was it the face of Nanea that I saw beneath the waters a while ago? Good! Bear my greetings to her when you two meet in the house of the dead." Hadden looked at the stream. It was in flood. He could not swim it, so, followed by the evil laugh of the prophetess, he sped towards the forest. After him came Nahoon, his tongue hanging from his jaws like the tongue of a wolf. Now he was in the shadow of the forest, but still he sped on, following the course of the river, till at length his breath failed, and he halted on the further side of a little glade, beyond which a great tree grew. Nahoon was more than a spear's throw behind him, therefore he had time to draw his pistol and make ready. "Halt, Nahoon!" he cried, as once before he had cried. "I would speak with you." The Zulu heard his voice and obeyed. "Listen," said Hadden. "We have run a long race and fought a long fight, you and I, and we are still alive, both of us. Very soon, if you come on, one of us must be dead, and it will be you, Nahoon, for I am armed, and as you know I can shoot straight. What do you say?" Nahoon made no answer, but stood still at the edge of the glade, his wide and glowering eyes fixed on the white man's face, and his breath coming in short gasps. "Will you let me go if I let you go?" Hadden asked once more. "I know why you hate me, but the past cannot be undone, nor can the dead be brought to earth again." Still Nahoon made no answer, and his silence seemed more fateful and more crushing than any speech. No spoken accusation would have been so terrible in Hadden's ear. He made no answer, but lifting his assegai, he stalked grimly toward his foe. When he was within 5 paces, Hadden covered him and fired. Nahoon sprang aside, but the bullet struck him somewhere, for his right arm dropped, and the stabbing spear that he held was jerked from it harmlessly over the white man's head. But still making no sound, the Zulu came on, and gripped him by the throat with his left hand. For a space they struggled terribly, swaying to and fro, but Hadden was unhurt and fought with the fury of despair, while Nahoon had been twice wounded, and there remained to him but one sound arm wherewith to strike. Presently, forced to earth by the white man's iron strength, the soldier was down, nor could he rise again. "Now we will make an end," muttered Hadden savagely, and he turned to seek the assegai, then staggered slowly back with starting eyes and reeling gait. For there before him, still clad in her white robe, a spear in her hand, stood the spirit of Nanea. "Think of it," he said to himself. dimly remembering the words of the Nyanga, when you stand face to face with the ghost of the dead in the home of the dead. Think of it. There was a cry and a flash of steel. The broad spear leapt towards him to bury itself in his breast. He swayed, he fell, and presently Black Heart clasped that great reward which the word of the bee had promised him. "Nahoon, Nahoon," murmured a soft voice. "Awake, it is no ghost, but I, Nanea, your living wife, to whom my Ehlose, or guardian spirit, has given it me to save you." Nahoon heard and opened his eyes to look, and his madness left him. "Welcome, wife," he said faintly. "Now I will live, since death has brought you back to me in the house of the dead." Today, Nahoon is one of the indunas of the English government in Zululand, and there are children about his kraal. It was from the lips of none other than Nanea, his wife, that the teller of this tale heard its substance. The bee also lives and practices as much magic as she dares under the white man's rule. On her black hand shines a golden ring shaped like a snake with ruby eyes, and of this trinket the bee is very proud. End of chapter 6. End of Black Heart and White Heart by Sir Henry Rider Haggard.
MrBookman here. I hope you enjoyed today's audiobook. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, but more importantly, if you're looking to lose 1 pound per day, guaranteed, make sure you check out the description, click or copy that link, and of course, we'll see you next time, and remember, you are appreciated.